Welcome to Celebrating Act Two, where John and I get to speak with Bill Jordan. We're getting older here. Our favorite philosopher and just all-around good guy. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing well. I hope you guys are.
Hey, Bill, we've all lived long enough that we've probably lived in a half a dozen or more places. We've moved around the country from East Coast to West Coast and a bunch of places in between. But I remember one time going back to the Jersey Shore to visit, to find, not to visit, but to find my grandmother's house. Now, she died
Hmm.
when I was 7, so whatever I remember is the memory of a 7-year-old.
Sure.
And boy, was I disappointed. I won't go into the description, but she was 2 houses from the beach, pristine beach, beautiful Jersey Shore. I went back, there were drunken sailors on the ground. The sand had been pushed up. There were condoms in the sand. It was disgusting. I did. Have you ever tried to go back to the old neighborhood?
Yeah, and I'm not experienced anything like that. The first thing that strikes me when I go back, because like you say, we remember it as kids. So my home in Newport News, Virginia, I left home to get into radio. I mean, late in my 18th year, I left home to start a quote a career uh, shortly before I became 19. But most of it, I was a little guy. When I go back, everything seems smaller than it did.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
houses, the yards, everything looks smaller. I went by my old house and I drive by it, and I think it every time I drive by, it's like, how did it take me an hour to mow that?
Yeah.
Or raking leaves or something like that. But that's one of the main things is how small everything looks. Of course, the
Yeah.
other thing too is the perspective of now. So I've got to go back, gosh, 50 years. The trees have grown. That's another thing that adds to the everything now looks small because the trees are so much bigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just driving through the old neighborhoods, man, all of the memories that come back as soon as I hit town, or even when I'm getting close to town, the memories that I haven't had in 50 years of an interaction with a friend or something my mom and dad did or my brothers did. It's amazing to me. I truly love it. There are people who dread going back, or what is the saying? You don't go home, you never do that.
Yeah.
I love it. I love high school reunions. I love all that stuff about going back. And you go by an old house you lived at, and you get so many memories. The first house I remember growing up in, and I got on a friend's bicycle. I didn't have a bicycle, and I was probably 6, 7 years old, maybe a little older. Anyway, I got on his bike, and the way I remember it was his driveway was like at a 60-degree, angle down into the street, and it was probably about a 50 or 60-foot long driveway. And I just got at the top of the driveway, and I lifted my feet off the pedals, and I just glided down and I wrecked, and then I got back up, and that's how I learned to ride a bike. But it was this steep grade, long driveway. I go by the house as an adult. The driveway looks like it's 15 feet, and the grade is about like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in my head, as a little guy, I thought it was immense.
Sure.
And that's the stuff that when you get back, you just, it's called a lie of the mind. You're sure something's the way it was, and you go back and it's just not. The playground behind our
Hmm.
school was small. I mean, I bet you I can go back and stand within 50 feet, if not less, from where I was standing when I heard the news that President Kennedy had been shot. Just little things like that, where I rode my bikes, where I played with my friends,
Yep.
in very small details that I remember. At least I think I remember them. Man, I love going back. I'm sorry you had that experience. I don't have anything like that. I have
Yeah,
almost all good memories about
yeah.
growing up.
I have to admit that it's probably been about 20 years since I physically have driven through a neighborhood. My wife grew up in the Bronx. She was walking distance to Yankee Stadium, where she and her brother used to go down for 90 cents or 50 cents for cheap sheets. Day or night, they could walk in that neighborhood. Can't walk in the neighborhood anymore, but it looks exactly the same. And talking about the day Kennedy was shot, I was coming to see her from school or something. I took the subway, and there was an L, and I was coming down the stairs of the subway. I'm passing a beauty parlor, which was next to the candy store, next to the deli, and they were blaring on the TV that Kennedy had been shot. That's how I found out about it. I remember, talk about being too small. Our first house was a 1,200-foot, three-story house, and I drove past it maybe 15, 20 years ago. So how the hell did we live in there? You know, we were four people in a three-story house of only 1,200 square feet, and I'm the one who built the dormer upstairs with my cousin. And so it brings back a lot of good memories. But the houses I grew up in Brooklyn, apartment buildings look the same. Everything looks the same. But the amazing thing, where I grew up as a kid, I haven't been there in years and years, and I saw it on Google Maps. And they have this thing where you can actually take a picture, you know, to take a street view and see what it looks like. The house looked the same, but we had in our front yard a Christmas. What Hallmark would have had as a Christmas tree, it must have been about 20 or 30 feet tall, and it was gone. And the house was turned into a preschool, which, given the fact that my father was a principal and my mother was a teacher, actually is pretty appropriate use of the place. But everything looked about the same, but it looked smaller somehow, and it really wasn't.
Yeah.
I went
Here's the
back.
great thing. Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I went back to see my old grammar school. It's now condos.
Mm.
It's a fancy condos. It's torn down, and now it's beautiful, brand new. 50 years is a long time. Things change.
It is.
Yeah.
You know what? Here's the other kind of crazy thing. You know, talking about the schools and seeing your old school, and the school where I was saying where I could go and stand right where I heard JFK was shot. Last time I was in town for a high school reunion, I went to that school and I parked and I just walked around the playground, and it's right there on the James River, right there on the James River. And I remembered that there was a way that we got in from recess, that we went up these stairs, went through these doors, and I went around the corner where the cafeteria is, and I looked through the window, and it was exactly as I remembered it. And it was just it was the coolest feeling. The other thing too, that the first house that I remember growing up in, down the street where I learned to ride my bike, this was a little house. It was 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, a little dining room, a little kitchen. My dad converted the garage into a den. Otherwise, we would have had nowhere to go. And there was a living room. That house now, and it was 1,500 square feet, maybe. That house now is listed real estate value at like well over $300,000.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's like LA prices, isn't it? I mean, it's like a little dinky house.
No. LA prices, that's very affordable.
Well,
Really.
apparently it's affordable up in Virginia as well. It's just, you get amazed at, I mean, I have no idea what my parents paid for that house, but the thought that this little thing, I mean, I know where I'm living now, and the house I'm living in now seems at least 2 times bigger than that house.
Sure.
But what the things cost now, a little bitty house. And it's also, I would recommend going to on Facebook, and you will probably find groups for the hometown that you grew up in. If you grew up in this town, I've got, you may have grown up in Newport News. I've got one if you may have grown up in Roanoke, Virginia. You guys probably have it for your hometowns. And you can also find ones from your school groups. And it's amazing the old photos you see. And it's like, man, those were the days, you know? Yeah. It's great. It's great. I love it. I love going back.
Time for another discussion, but using Facebook in a sort of related way, I found maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I found some kid that I had gone to kindergarten with, who when I was off my feet for a couple of years, and he used to visit me every year from about the ages of 7 to 9, and we lost touch. And I thought maybe he died in Vietnam, or I looked for him over the years, and through Facebook, by the way, could be another good conversation for another time. I found somebody with the same last name, and it turned out to be his son, who was a little skeptical, but I said, ask him if he played chess with me as a 7, 8 year old. And not only was he the right guy, but he says, I know who you are. My father used to talk about this kid that he learned how to play chess with. He put us in touch, and I met him about 6 or 7 years ago down in Florida, where he had moved when we were visiting some friends. So, different conversation for a different day. And you know what? He looked smaller than I remember him too.
Yeah, that's the good stuff, though, man. That's some good stuff. And again, that's one of the things that people complain about getting older. If you don't get older, you don't get memories like that. You don't get reconnect with somebody from kindergarten that was 65 years ago or something. It's just, to me, it's one of the blessings of getting older is just reconnecting.
By
That's
the way,
wonderful.
John is big on high school reunions and things like that. You've gone on 2 or 3 of them in just the last few years, haven't you?
I have. I've been kind of searching. I go back to the New York area, and my trip is really about relatives. Hooking up with relatives that I haven't seen or talked to in a long time. And then on some occasions that I've never met, long lost relatives. But it is great to go back, generally speaking, for the memories, even though sometimes it's disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go with that. Grab the positives.
Speaking of grabbing things positive.
How coincidental. Again, this is just one of the little bennies of getting older when you're a baby boomer and you look back on all this stuff and share those stories with friends like you guys. So live your life, forget your age, embrace the boom, baby boomer. There you go. Thanks for having me back, guys.
Thanks for the memories.
I just love it. And, my wife and daughter can ride through my hometown and go, okay, that's where Dad did this. That's where he walked to the stool. That's where he went to 7-Eleven with 30 pennies.
That's the reason why he's the way he is. Now we understand.
For more on Celebrating Act Two, visit our webpage, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and tell your friends. Celebrating Act Two is the user manual for the second half of your life.